All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're breaking down a pretty ruthless philosophy for gaining a competitive edge. And look, this isn't some dusty old history lesson. This is a modern take on Machiavellian thinking, pulled from our source materials and distilled into a kind of, well, a protocol for power.
So it all kicks off with a pretty direct and maybe a little uncomfortable question. I want you to think about your life, your choices. Are you really the one writing the story? Or are you just an actor following a script somebody else handed you? Because, according to this philosophy, that's the default setting for most of us. This quote right here, that's the core diagnosis. The whole problem this protocol is built to solve is this idea that the normal, good person path is really just a script that makes you predictable, easy to manage, and ultimately marks you as prey.
So how does this script actually work? Well, that brings us to our first section. We're going to unpack the script for prey. You have to understand the system, before you can even think about breaking out of it.
This slide really lays out the trap. The argument here is that most of the rules we're taught, be nice, be dependable, always be there for people, are designed to make you predictable. On one side, you see the result. Someone who's reliable, sure, but also tied down, easy to control. On the other side, that's the alternative. A person who isn't just following the rules, but is making them. It's the difference between being a piece on the board and being the player moving the pieces.
Let's really drill down into these so-called liabilities. The philosophy is saying that these traits we think of as good are actually huge strategic weaknesses. Seeking approval from others, that just gives them all the power. Being an open book, being predictable, you lose all your leverage. Every one of these supposed virtues is actually a crack in your armor. Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? This gets us to the second stage, and honestly, it's the most important one. Building the fortress mind. This is all about a complete internal teardown and rebuild. And here's the process, laid out straight from the source material. It's a pretty brutal four-step operation to dismantle that old way of thinking. First, delete the past. Stop letting your old mistakes run the show. Second, freeze emotions. Stop reacting, start calculating. Third, uninstall self-doubt. Treat it like a virus on your computer. And last, forge belief. Basically, act like you've already won until it becomes true. The big idea here is to treat every loss not as some emotional failure, but as a cold, hard upgrade to your own operating system.
Now, a key weapon for building that fortress is this concept, strategic indifference. And look, this isn't about being a heartless robot. It's about being insulated. It's making a conscious choice to stop reacting to every little thing, insults, compliments, drama, and instead only focus on the long-term outcome. It's your shield against getting emotionally manipulated.
So let's move on to section 3 and see how this all connects. Once that internal fortress is solid, your focus shifts outward. The protocol starts to reframe every social interaction as a kind of strategic battlefield, what it calls the invisible war. And on this new battlefield, you need new rules of engagement. Take mastering silence. That's not just about being quiet. It's about creating this psychological space that basically forces other people to show you their cards. Hiding your intentions, that keeps you unpredictable, always a few steps ahead. And making disobedience costly, that's just about training people how to treat you by having unshakable boundaries.
And this slide introduces the kind of person you're supposed to become in this war, the dark empath. Now pay attention to the difference here. A normal empath feels what you feel and wants to help you. But a dark empath, according to the source, they understand what you feel, but they use that understanding not to fix you, but to figure out your next move and, most importantly, to protect their own peace of mind. It's using emotional intelligence as a weapon for defense.
This brings us to a really foundational economic idea in this whole philosophy. Section 4, the power of scarcity. This is all about understanding that your value, just like gold or anything else, is all about supply and demand. The whole logic starts right here. Power, authority, value. It dies the second it becomes common. When you're always around, always available, always predictable, you become common. You lose your edge.
Which leads to this critical point. Your value in the eyes of others isn't actually determined by how much you give them when you're there. It's determined by what they lose when you're not. By pulling back, by being less available, you force them to reevaluate what you're worth. Your absence becomes a tool.
And that all boils down to this one final command. A commodity is easy to get, interchangeable, and gets used up. A luxury? It's rare, it's desired, it's respected.
The goal is to transform yourself from one to the other.
Okay, so all of these steps, breaking the script, building the mind fortress, mastering scarcity, they're all leading to one final objective. Section 5, Achieving Sovereign Reality.
This right here is the end game, internal sovereignty. It's the point where you completely unplug from needing anyone else's validation. You stop asking for permission. You stop looking for applause. You become your own source of authority. Your world revolves around you, and nothing and no one else gets to decide for you.
So, how do you get there? This last piece of advice is all about embodiment. The protocol basically says you have to perform the part first. Project the confidence, the authority, the sovereignty you want to have. The theory is that if you do that relentlessly, day in and day out, that performance will eventually harden and become your actual new reality.
And we're going to end on this final jab from the source material. It's a challenge, really. Everything we just walked through, it's not just stuff to know, it's a standard to be enforced. Because like it says, just knowing this stuff doesn't give you power. Applying it does. So the only question left really is, what are you going to do with it?